justified through a state of exception and a narrative of maternal duty. I argue that the prominence of the maternal figure in performing or facilitating the violence in the final scenes and the presence of a police officer, even as the state is narrated as absent, serve to reframe vigilante violent acts as extra-legal acts, by which I mean transgressive acts of violence that would be considered illegal and against the law are being reframed as necessary, legitimate actions. In this context, the vigilante mothers function as an extension of the state into the civic sphere. By examining how the final scenes position the audience as participants in the extra-legal violence, I suggest that the films produce a pedagogy of violence where extra-legal violence serves both a disciplinary and an emancipatory function that normalize a military response through the figure of the militarized mother as dutiful subject, as citizen subject. In Mom, Devki and Jagan's face-off in the snow is interrupted by Matthew, who appeals to Devki to think of a family and let the law handle Jagan. Devki is at first reluctant, repeating again and again that Jagan raped her daughter, but she eventually releases her gun. Yet when Devki begins to say that it will happen again and no one can prevent it, Matthew changes his mind and tells Devki that if she must kill Jagan, she should do it with his police gun. Nevertheless, it is not until Arya reveals that she has been listening and calls Devki mom for the first time that Devki shoots Jagan. In this way, the scene falls together as resolution of justice with a reconciliation of mother and daughter. This folding together of motherhood and justice is noteworthy, firstly, because Devki's position as a mother has been questioned and confirmed by multiple characters throughout the film. Secondly, because several characters and the film itself have positioned the mother figure as a divine figure with a right to act when God cannot. Because of this, Devki's pursuit of justice and her duty as a mother to protect Arya are placed above the rule of law. At the same time, the setting and Devki's repeated dialogue about Jagan's crimes and the fact that this will happen again frame Devki's extra-legal violence as caused by exceptional circumstances. This claim and the inability to pursue justice by legal means is likewise important to the framing of the climax in Mardani. Despite Shivani being a police officer, at the last minute, Karan's jeers that he will escape punishment leads her to encourage the abducted girls to take justice into their own hands. In both scenes then, while judicial failure is framed as an absence of the state, the police continue to be present and in fact encourages the extra-legal violence. Feminist legal scholars have demonstrated that within the law, conditions have been articulated that hierarchize citizens, treating some as expendable or undeserving of access to the law, while other conditions formulate when violence can be legally done by the state or by proxy through civilians. That is, while lawlessness and extrajudiciary actions might be framed as exceptional, they are in fact integral to how the law operates and to how the state manages and governs. I suggest that it is in this context that we need to consider the language of exceptionalism and extra-legal violence in Mom and Mardani. The state of exception is based on the formulation of a threat, real or imagined, to the state and its subjects. And in these films, it is the gender violence done to someone who functions like a daughter, and the discursive absence of a legal state to enforce justice. For this reason, people are encouraged to act on the state's behalf. The state of exception, therefore, does not necessarily mean the state is less present, because through the law's legitimization of the extra-legal violence, the state can be present in new forms. Indeed, while both Mom and Mardani visually and dialogically formulate a state of exception, the state is represented in both scenes through the civilian dressed police officers, Matthew and Shivani, suggesting that as the goals of vigilantes and the state run parallel, the final extra-legal violence is an extension of the law. The subject position of Devki and Shivani, specifically the role as mothers, further legitimizes the extra-legal violence in the films. What defines motherhood in the films, however, is not biological kinship, but rather presence, care, and a willingness and ability to protect. Early scenes in both films show Devki and Shivani feeding Arya and asking about the day and going about domestic chores. These everyday acts of care prepares to see Devki and Shivani as maternal figures. It is when Arya and Pyari are harmed and the state is unable to punish the perpetrators, that we see that Devki and Shivani are capable of doing more violent acts in the name of motherhood. By placing everyday acts of care on the same continuum as the violent, exceptional acts of extralegal violence, a muscular, militarized motherhood becomes a legitimized expression of maternal duty, which is further validated through references to the Hindu goddess Durga, or throughout continuous visuals preparing for violence in the domestic sphere. And though Arya has not been able to recognize Devki's everyday maternal care, Devki's willingness to commit violence on her behalf leaves Arya to acknowledge Devki as her mom. Through a narrative of risk, threat, risk, and protection, and maternal duty, the films produce and disseminate a vocabulary for legal and illegal acts of violence. Motherhood, its duties and obligations become one of the axes that translate violence act into intelligible, justifiable acts that shifts violence from illegal to extralegal. Yet precisely because it frames the acts as extralegal, it begs the question, who has the right to commit extralegal violence? As Shivani exits the storage room, the camera focuses on the pained and angered faces of the abducted girls, while the sound of conches announces the beginning of the song Mardani anthem. The song consists of mix of Sanskrit verses to the Hindu goddess Durga and Hindi lyrics that tie together anger and calls for justice. By cutting between close-ups of angry girls, their feet as they kick into Karan's body and Karan's bloodied face, the scene weaves together punitive violence, a feeling of outrage, and a sense of vindication. In this way, the scene functions as what Oshik Sirkar has referred to as a spectacle of emancipation. As audiences, we are invited to take pleasure in witnessing Karan's gradual destruction and to participate in the acts of violence, construed as just, without feeling complicit. Yet every so often, the camera takes in the faces of the girls as if looking from Karan's perspective, functioning as a visceral warning of the repercussions of transgressions. In Mom, on the other hand, it's Sridevi's expressive face as Devki shoots Jagan, which guides us to feel the outrage experienced by her and the anguish as well. And yet, as Devki shoots, we are looking at the gun from a frontal position, meaning the position of the camera places us, the audience, in Jagan's position. By placing these two viewing positions side by side, both visually, effectively, sonically, and haptically, the films position the division between vigilante and villain as a binary. The emphasis on the physical violence done to Karan and Jagan can be seen as cases of spectacular violence, a disciplinary warning to criminals who think they are safe from the law, while the celebratory tone suggests its function as a spectacle of emancipation and empowerment. Yet while the theme of gender violence presents the choice as an easy binary, it's worth asking what happens if extralegal violence is legitimized when state-subject relations and transgressions are less straightforward. Scholarship on spectatorship suggests an interactive process of meaning-making happening between audience and film text, which works through not only sight, but also memory, smell, and haptic encounters. The scene in Mardani recalls to our senses memories of blood, sweat, and outrage. The outrage we are invited to feel draws on the parallels between the story we have just witnessed and the stories we have heard in the news in our daily lives. And Mom and Mardani deliberately bring these histories to the foreground in our mind. We can also think of Arya's rape in that case, which happens in a moving vehicle. It is not simply visually and haptically that Mardani interpolates its audience. If we remember Shivani's argument for why the abducted girls can act with impunity, namely that the violence done by a group will not be considered murder. After all, how many people are required for a riot according to the law? There are not more than 20 girls in the storeroom with Shivani. So Shivani must be anticipating that more people are participating in the act of vengeance. Maybe we audiences are also implicated in that group. And at least through the binary construction of the viewing positions, the only alternative for us as viewers is the villain. The interpolation of the audiences during the acts of violence, specifically the sense of outrage and empowerment, in conjunction with the justification of extralegal violence through a narrative of exceptionalism and maternal duty, is important for understanding how a pedagogy of violence is produced and disseminated through the new rape revenge genre in Mom and Mardani. I understand this pedagogy of violence as promoting extralegal violence as an appropriate and desired citizen response to atrocious acts without acknowledging the limitations to who gets to call something atrocious and who gets to do extralegal violence. As Swati Parasha argues a pedagogy of violence militarizes, normalizes, and disciplines. It functions through a spectacle of violence as much as through legitimization of violence. As a public visual medium, cinema's capacity for appealing to audiences and its ability to structure emotional responses, here via the appealing figure of the mother, serve to normalize violence and a militarized response through celebratory depictions. Within this framework, I suggest that the pedagogy of violence in Mom and Mardani operates on two levels. Through the figure of the mother and the exceptional circumstances, the film teach violence as a normal and desirable act, a civic response, indeed a civic duty. Additionally, the film teaches through violence, specifically gender violence as a threat to female subjects, and violence done to those who commit it. For this reason, this pedagogy of violence must be read in the context of both law, gender, and citizenship, and the narrative of risk, threat, protection. Motherhood, exceptional circumstances, and a binary opposition of vigilante and villain frame extralegal violence as a desirable normal outcome to exceptional criminal violence. Yet as spectators, we need to ask what other forms of justice might be left unexplored by framing violence as the only response. Furthermore, when interpolated by the films, we need to ask how this framing of a simplistic binary prevents us from recognizing the multiple state-subject relations that frames only some subjects' acts as extralegal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amalie, for that presentation. We will go into questions later on. Next, we move on to Suman.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Suman Shanker, a PhD student at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Bombay. I'll be presenting my paper on the topic, Interrogating Bollywood Commercial Courtroom Dramas, Sexual Violence, and the Cinematic Figure of the Victim Woman. So the feminist critique of commercial cinema has examined the absence and presence of femininity and violation of the female characters, where they are made spectacle of for the pleasure of largely male audiences situated within the context of a patriarchal socio-political life. In this context, I analyzed Shanker Sarin's Chicken Curry Law, made in 2019, and Ajay Bahel's Section 375, Marzi Ya Zabardasti, also released in 2019. To contemplate the positioning of victimhood and violation through the cinematic figure of the hyper-visible yet metaphorically silent victim woman from the context of male scripting of sexual violence in the courtroom genre. Both aforementioned courtroom genres, dramas dwell into the realm of legal justice system, which manifests a phenomenal Bollywood discourse of constituting the female body as an emblem of culture and honor. Chicken Curry Law and Section 375, for a moment in their narrative, seemingly try to subvert the genre of dominant sexual violence scripts, only to fall into visual eroticization and romanticization of violation and the masculine notion of resistance in commercial cinema. I argue through them the problematic of the traditional emphasis of violation that revolves around the city, targeting women in the public space to indicate their vulnerability to violation. This narrow imagination of the urban modern woman, the legal arguments around the triumph of justice over the bodily integrity of the women who seemingly lack any agency within this script. I further engage with the political questions of essential qualifiers or constitutive elements of who becomes represented in the script, and the aesthetical question of how this representation actually, the aesthetical question of how representation takes place, particularly the internalized rape script, the rhetorical sketch of feminine within these male scripts, and the reification of the victim and woman, and the complicity of law in maintaining woman's body as an emblem of shame or honor. The cultural silence regarding consent and the male assertion of power that remains unacknowledged within this violation. So moving on to Chicken Curry Law, which is basically written and directed by Shanker Sarin. It revolves around Maya Johnson, a foreign dancer who's raped, bruised, and left on the streets by a politician's son, Makia, and his nephew, Nana. Satya Deshmukh, a social activist and a criminal lawyer, Sitapati Shukla, become her allies in getting her justice in her ordeal. The script moves in and out of courtroom and basically harps on song sequences to show the trauma suffered by the victim. who's accused of immoral trafficking and prostitution, and a predictable plot which basically ensues where all the victims are bought or killed. And the story takes a turn when the female ally Satya is murdered, while Sitapati continues to fight for justice alone. Believing that there is no conclusive evidence that has been presented to establish Maya as a victim in the court, since she already knew the accused and was a semi-conscious condition while she had a sexual relationship with the accused, court acquits the suspect and orders a further investigation of her drug use through a medical examination. Sitapati, thus dejected by this verdict, Sitapati instigates Makia and his brother right outside the court, who shoot him dead, only to get arrested this time, thus getting Maya some degree of justice. At the end, Maya turns into a social activist herself for the same NGO where Satya had worked for. So the title of the movie, which is The Crux, hints at a failure of the Indian judicial system, which treats its victim as a chicken, which is being slaughtered and cooked slowly within this system with no justice in sight. While section 375, Marzi ya Zabardasti, it follows the story of an assistant costume designer, Anjali Dangle, who accuses the film director Rohan Khurana of raping her, due to which the latter is arrested and convicted by a sessions court. On his wife's behest, the case is taken up by a senior criminal lawyer, Tarun Saluja, while Hiral Gandhi, an idealistic upcoming feminist criminal lawyer, represents Anjali. Through cross-examination, Tarun eventually establishes that Anjali's consensual relationship with Rohan, which began as her trying to further her career, but turned into an emotional one for her. On facing rejection from him as more than a sexual partner and a subordinate, she eventually uses sexual encounter with him to file a rape case against him. The courtroom argument that follows dispute the legality of the conditions that are laid down in section 375 and the problem in interpreting consent in the context of affairs that have gone sour. The resolution provided by the judges entail an explicit acceptance of the merit of the case as unavailability of any evidence to corroborate a strict sense of force or consent, and Anjali's intent to avenge her humiliation, but eventually providing a justice in favor of Anjali as a victim, in tune with the public outcry to not let a influential man get away with his exploitation. At the end, Anjali confesses to Hiral, agreeing with Tarun's argument, and Hiral realizing the substance in Tarun's word, we are in the business of law, not of justice, which is the guiding point of this script. Now, the imagined feminine in the scripts, we can see there's a negotiation of traditional and modern culture over the bodies of the women in both of these cinematic scripts. Now, Vijay Mishra, he argues that Bollywood cinema is largely a massive meta-narrative, reverberating the ancient epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana in its preoccupation with dharma and adharma, which basically conceptualizes the cinematic narrative of virtues, moralities, duties, and ultimately what constitutes justice. Most rape scripts thus build a construct of female echoing this realm of dharma and adharma, which translates into portrayal of women who have suffered this physical or sexual injustice and thereby seeking redress, falling into the categorization of either the divine or the daily. Thus, the parallels of the victim woman within the courtroom genre can be viewed from this lens. The aesthetics of representing a sexual violation of the female body as narrative in itself within these scripts for audiences is the politics of negotiating between visualizing and romanticizing violation while not succumbing to making it a common consumption spectacle. Chicken Curry Law and Section 375, both as courtroom dramas based on rape scripts, in text they challenge the reductive portrayal of sexual violation through the unnecessities of eroticizing rape, but fail at dismantling them entirely. A significant driver of these courtroom dramas, much like others in their genre, is the dramatic breakdown of the corrupt state apparatus for providing justice. The crucial role of courtroom signals the path of women, the path that women take in their crisis, allowing them to either becoming vigilantes or victims. Other courtroom dramas that have been in the background of my own examination are the 1980s avenging women formulaic film structures, opening with the setting of a household with an absence of a strong paternal figure, where the figure of the heroine is placed at the center as a working woman, and there are circumstances which lead to her violation and the subsequent denial of justice in the court, relegating her to a realms of cynical and vengeful woman. This leads her down the path of avenging justice for herself, culminating into the violent death of her violators. The image of the victim and vigilante basically dominated films of the 1980s like Insaf Ka Tarazu, Mirch Masala, Pratighat, Zakhmi Aurat, Damini, and have been critiqued over and over again in a lot of texts. Maithili Rao, she critiqued the films in the avenging genre as being hostile to female sexuality and nothing more than a victimization masquerading as female power, reflecting the cultural schizophrenia of the society. Both script, whether it's chicken curry law or section 375, they take the route of the legal process, closing off the possibilities of such a direct vigilantism on the face of it. But there's simultaneously a structure of repetition and differences within both of these courtrooms. So the shifting canvas of the body and the identity of the victim woman presents a starting point of the victim as an honorable and noble woman. There's an overarching need to portray her as modern, yet she's domesticated, thereby defining the ideal womanhood in relation to the cinematic text. She is basically, the narrative demands her to be a heroine who's attractive and bold with her appearance, but also builds in pieces an initial script which inclines her towards a near promiscuous behavior. Then the severity of violence within these texts is perceived in the context of their social class, their gender role in terms of their marital or relationship status, and the attribution of the responsibility for the assault and their active resistance to it. And further, the stigma that follows the violence, which must be greater for the woman than any other figure within the script. While Maya's narrative in Chicken Curry Law is complicated with her dancing career that implies that she subscribes to involuntary exhibition and sexualization of her own body. There are dance and song sequences in the beginning that conjure a celebration of her fragility as well as power. While Anjali in section 375, her consensual affair with her married boss at the beginning implies a compliance with her violator. Both are used as an evidence of their deviant sexuality and culpability in the otherwise non-sexual encounters with their violators. Both scripts try to attack at the base of internalized misogynistic underpinnings of our own rape scripts, challenging the idea of virtuous femininity, constructing the idea of the ideal victim, but end up romanticizing the violence itself. The portrayal of feminine sensibility in expressing their sexual desires and anxious instigators of trouble within the largely patriarchal sensibilities of our time can be read somewhat as underlining the reality of the audiences itself who rationalize such portrayals, and thus these character sketches are pretty much consistent with their rationalization. The narrative flow of both the film establish a certain basic constitutive feature in this genre, that is bombarding us with reality through newspaper clippings, reference to actual cases, interviews of common women in the streets, and newspaper reporting, and thus playing out sort of a general fear of the public, general fear and fantasies of the public on screen. Both the courtrooms build its narrative around sexual violence, which causes a loss of honor or trauma among the victim women, paving way for their transition into a victim, such as Maya, or an avenger like Anjali. Thus, this transformation is very critical to the script. But it rarely dwells on the sore issues around the perplexing and mundane nature of sexual aggression and directs our attention towards very safer and less controversial nature of violation behind such a transformation. So undermining the ultimate goal of empowering these female characters. For example, Lalita Gopalan in her Avenging Women in Indian Cinema, she refers to this construct of a rape script, which particularly the narrative is around the ideal victim, which intersects with the socio and political life of the nation as a giddy concoction of sadomasochistic scopic pleasure intended largely for its male audience. Critical also to this courtroom drama is the concept of the ideal male aggressors. as an archetype of an anti-hero who's a threat to the safety and survival of the women everywhere in the public space. Thus, Rohan from section 375 is fitted into a spoiled, influential man and a cheating husband, while Makia and Nana are rowdy, womenizing brats of an influential politician. But this is not the only male presence driving the script. The inequitable representation of gendered roles and power within these scripts foreground the evident presence of a strong male figure as essential to women's survival and safety. The male sympathizer. For example, like Sitapati, he's essential ally, unflinching in his higher moral and professional character, who provides a symbolic resonance and sanctity of liberal and law-abiding witness to his victims' resistance. He legitimizes and convinces the audience of his incontestable role as a driving force behind any justice, if it is accorded. But the assertion and confrontation in resistance is almost unpalatable to the oppressive sexual violation when offered by the urban professional woman like Hiral, who's projected as a utopian torchbearer of women's rights and thus requires a formidable force in the form of Tarun, the defense lawyer. In commercial cinema, where masculinity is the primary driver in the script, Laura Mulvey, she puts forward this concept of male gaze as a definitive element of these cinema, which objectifies female bodies and manipulates all its viewers, whether male or female, into that role. The question is not whether she is present in the script, but how real is her presence in the scripts that largely chronicles the male perspective, perceptive experience of the world. Pivotal to this script is also the interaction between the good lawyer and the bad lawyer, where the victim becomes a silent spectator of her own trial and the arguments are pitched not to the law, but to the audience. What marks repetition in the arguments between the lawyers in these courtroom dramas is their reliance on the language, is not just the reliance on language of law, but a language of emotions, a virile display of intelligence, playing at the anxious edges of law and sexuality. The bad lawyer can be seen to subscribing to a patriarchal norm, but the good lawyer does not overtly espouse any feminist principles. Also, a feminist possibility is missing in these collective possibilities missing in these courtrooms, whereby a victim woman stands on trial alone. Section 375 subverts that notion to a certain extent by pitching female allies to the victim in the form of Hiral, her idealistic lawyer, Shilpa, who's the defense lawyer's wife, who perpetually expresses her doubts of her husband supporting a convict, Kenas, who's basically the wife of the accused, who refuses to participate in his innocence, and the liberal and patient judges, Justice Indrani. So, chicken curry law, on the other hand, it has impassioned speeches within the trial which raify the essentialized role of the victim women and try to conflate them as repositories of familial and national honor unbelonging to their own. So rape is rejected as an assertion of men's power over the female body, but and a violation of her bodily integrity, but as a beleaguering of the nation itself and a desecration of its chastity. So it reflects the focus of legal system on righting sexual wrongs through protecting women's body, alluding them not as site of pleasure, but as a site of procreation and nurturing. So the normative language of this courtroom weighs any kind of talk around agency, sexuality, and fluidity. So this has significantly claimed the movement towards specific figure of a victim who could be claimed as a national property or a brave daughter in all our general consciousness. So those that deserve media sympathy and public outrage like Maya, while there are many other women like Anjali whose violation may not be as horrific and does not deserve the privilege of #hang the rapist. Thus, the injustice meted out at the end has to be proportional to the violation itself. So balancing rape with justice of avenging. While chicken curry law itself thrives on the dissonance between victim and the state, upholding the politics of honor by providing a resolution that is beyond the reality of law, Section 375 reflects the reverse. It settles for a just verdict. So while concluding, I would like to say that the cinematic narratives based on sexual violence provide female protagonists with a very dominant role in scripts. making them women-centric scripts, but they tie her presence and power within the script to this predicament of violation. The scripting weaves city, sexual violation, and visible women in public spaces together, thus exposing the fear of threat and vulnerability to sexual violation. The cinematic, its narrative itself takes a very progressive stand while criminalizing sexual violence, but simultaneously it caters to the voyeuristic needs of representing and viewing violation. The representation, the scenes of rape, revenge, justice, thus prompts us towards a very masculine underpinning in scripts of violence and what constitutes its aftermath. The linguistic gendering within these scripts inscribes rape onto our everyday consciousness, just as it is posited in the representation and interpretation on the screen. They have a very intimate relation. Rape scenes itself have a very intimate relationships with such narratives, which are invoked continuously in courtroom sequences as evidence to show trauma experienced by the victim. Interesting to note in this is that chicken curry law invokes scenes of violation through the eyes of the victim, but in section 375, it is through the eyes of the accused and not the victim. So thus playing on the need to provide audiences with a definitive side that the film itself takes. Our own experiences and notion of resistance basically are terrorized in terms of the ascriptions related in the script related to violence, resistance, and trauma. What does a realistic account of feminist resistance look like that of Maya? Or would an oppressive other make more sense only if it was someone like Makia or Nana? But it is an acceptable cinematic resolution to the public sentiment and appetite for having politically correct strips. Thus, the problem is not a woman's problem, but a general social one, which necessitates that more radical the resistance, more conservative is its resolution. So the cinematic closure compromises sexual violation by providing resolutions such as Maya changing into a social worker, thus providing her a symbolic sanctity, or despite her compromised position, giving her sort of honor and acceptance within the society. So although while Anjali salvaged from her
Suman, just a reminder to wrap up soon, please.
Yeah. So although the women portrayed within the scripts are non-traditional, yet at the end of it, they aspired for acceptance into the traditional fold of the public lives. So feminist exploration of the courtroom dramas are about the questions we ask and how we frame our responses. So Section 375, it interrogates the cultural silence on women's sexual agency, but it doesn't disrupt the notion of perpetual consent, despite bringing the crucial conversation around consent as the centerpiece of the film. But the film significance within this genre lies in the otherwise omitted process of MLC in camera proceedings and the crucial session court's judgment leading to an appeals process in the higher court that is missing in most films in its genre. It inserts public opinions of interviews of women on the streets and the impact that media outrage has on such kind of cases. So neither of these narratives is a model of feminist identification, but it is very farther from the messy truth of desire and identity. And the core to these scripts is the readings in patriarchy. So at the end, I would like to say that the cinematic representations within these scripts doesn't lament or mourn grief or the loss over the loss of the intimate after sexual violation. It fails to drive the audience through the emotional career of the victim survivor women by dragging their trial on the basis of just relying on character credibility. So basically at every stage of inquiry into the act of violence, like Maya's resistance to be doubts posed on her credibility, or Anjali's emotional abuse that preceded the act of violence and betrayal of trust by Rohan. So these kind of basic notions are not brought entirely out by the script. So ordinary cinematic narrative, in itself is inadequate in its representation to imagine the ways the violence, trauma, and resistance lives on an audience collective consciousness. At the end, I would like to thank TISS for its support and for its patience, and to my own guide for the directions in this, for giving me directions in this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suman. We'll move ahead to Nisha.
Hello, my name is Nisha, and I'm from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, and my paper is titled "The Female Cop in Hindi Cinema, Agent of Power, or Just Another Novel Trope." Police investigation, action, and thriller films form a large section of Indian cinema. While there is a plethora of male cop films, female cop films occupy a small space. Also, while actors get to play policemen holding all kinds of ranks across the hierarchy, actresses avail select few positions and fewer iconic roles. The paper aims to analyze and develop a typology of Hindi female cop films. It questions the representation of the police women, their purpose, and the impact of the changed gender on the police personnel, changed gender of the police personnel on the story. It also analyzes how these films situate the gendered audience. The paper concludes that the women police officers remain mostly a trope of spatial, social, and representative politics, which can be of the following three broad types: avenging women cops, hypermasculine vigilante women cops, or and sexualizing enticing bodies. Though the study presents an overview of female cop films in Hindi cinema, the discussion focuses closely on the films Sakmi Aurat, Khalnayak, and Mardani. So the first two categories that I just mentioned, avenging women cops and hypermasculine vigilante women cops, can be seen as extensions of the much older rape revenge genre, which is quite popular across the globe. Amalie also talked about, Amalie and Suman both talked about this genre, so I don't think I need to expand much about it. Just that these films center around rape and use it as an entry point into the character's development as the judicial system fails the victim and the family. In an article, Ranjini Majumdar, The Legal Unspeakable Rape in 1980s Bombay Cinema, talked about the origin and rise of rape revenge films in Hindi cinema as a powerful rhetorical device addressing the growing women's movement in the 1970s and 80s. These films capitalized, according to her, on the increase in media attention to such cases of violence inflicted on women, growing public awareness of sexuality, and the success of American rape revenge films. Important for our discussion, Ranjini Majumdar illustrates two kinds of rape revenge films based on the agents of vengeance as the victim or someone on behalf of the victim. She further clarifies these categories by citing Sarah Pulsansky, who states that the later film depends upon the film where we have someone on behalf of the victim as the agent of vengeance. These depend on rape to motivate and justify a particularly violent version of masculinity. Relegating women to minor props in the narrative. It is fascinating that Pulsansky does not directly call the other avenger a man, because I shall be substituting the violent version of masculinity with the masculinized policewoman to suggest that the policewoman possessing the lathi or a gun as the symbolic phallic becomes the agent of the avenger, becomes the avenger of the assaulted woman. However, Pulsansky's assertion that the films with the raped victim herself taking avenge can be understood as a feminist narrative is quite problematic. Gopalan counters this in an article, Avenging Women in Indian Cinema. Lalita Gopalan counters this She recounts that though women were given consequential roles in 1970s women-centric films, they soon started a stereotype. As someone also talked about the formulaic structure of the film opening in a happy, normal family setting with an absence of patriarchal figure, which enables and forces, in some sense, the woman to go out and work, giving her some modernity, some and masculinity, which has to be opposed, and thus she is raped. And then the legal system fails her, denies her justice, and she, distribution by this, avenges herself by violence, usually by violently killing the victim, killing the rapist. We have films like, as Amalie and Suman both said, like give the example of Insaf Ka Tarazu, Bihar, Sherni, Kumari. All these films are the formulaic films of the rape revenge genre. It is fascinating, so when Zakhmi Aurat Khalnaik and a much later film like Mardani share more or less the same structure. Further, rape and other kinds of sexual assault done on the female body are used as an entry point to showcase the strength of the victim's soul and purity. Considering rape a fate worse than death, all these films delineate the honor issue of sexual assault, mystifying female sexuality, inherently blaming the victim as defiled and damaged. Moreover, the films use rape as a method for the emancipation in some sort of the woman from the patriarchal clutches of the social and legal system. And now liberated, she can fight her wrongdoers without any care of the world because there's nothing else to lose. She can be allowed to be strong and independent only when she has once been subjected to masculine power, both in terms of a sexual object and a victim denied justice by patriarchal institutions of law and justice. Nonetheless, even when the woman somehow becomes part of the legal and judicial system, the predominant patriarchal aspect does not leave the space. In films where women are police officers, we still see a repetition of rape revenge formulaic structure. A direct example of this is the 1998 film Zakhmi Aurat with Dimple Kapadia as Kiran Dutt, the policewoman. The whole film revolves around rape and sexual assault, opening with a montage sequence of rape, newspaper reports of rape. Using the avenging woman setup, here too Kiran has no familial bonds, no paternal figure except her lover, Suraj Prakash. The fierce, confident, modern Kiran is punished for her independence and modernity by subjecting her to gang rape. Whereas earlier, Kiran was asking other rape victims to seek justice and not care about what the world would say. Once subjected to rape, she herself says, she said, I cannot look into anyone's eyes. She starts doubting her own purity. However, when the court denies her justice, she asserts that the story of her life does not end here. Thus evidently making the rape as an entry point into a new phase of her character and the film, as she decides to avenge herself along with the other women who were denied justice by castrating the rapists to make them useless men, so that they too would not be able to look into anyone's eyes for the rest of their life. The background song, the main background song, अपनी रक्षा करेगी आज की जख्मी औरत किसी की तरह कल की तरह बेबस ना रहेगी आज की जख्मी औरत. That is today's wounded woman will defend / avenge herself. She will not be helpless like other times, like old times. Resonate with the avenging women foundation of the film. The second category of female cops is the policewoman as the avenging agent, resonating with the male avenger, for example, the Mardani franchise. The first part of which I'll focus on, the 2014 one. Amelia already told you the story. So here we have Rani Mukherjee as the senior inspector, Shivani Shivaji Roy. The name of the film itself, Mardani, meaning man-like, affirms that she is just like the man who takes on the mission to avenge the assaulted woman. On a positive note, unlike popular male cops like Tapang, Singham, and the helicopter driving ACP Jay of the Dhoom series, Shivani is not shown as superhumanly powerful. Her portrayal is more realistic than the others. However, she's still shown as the jolly Dabang kind of an officer who makes nagging bites and other misogynist jokes without any provocation whatsoever. This counters the whole social messaging of the film, as the only song present in the film, the Madani anthem, says, "Jis duniya mein maa behne rishte nahi hai gaali hai." That is, in a world, the film's English subtitle loosely translates it to, "In a world where mothers and sisters are not blessings but a curse." A more suitable translation should have been, "A world where mother and daughters are curse words, not terms of relationships." Anyway, beginning as a criminal crime thriller, it suddenly turns into vigilantism. It valorizes encounters, extrajudicial killings by police, and public outrage as in the name of justice. Amalie talked about it in great deal. What is ironic in the film is that in the beginning itself, the very idea of public outrage was questioned when Shivani's husband, Dr. Roy, was assaulted by public on false allegations of sexual misconduct with a female patient. Further, the attribution of vigilante masculine qualities to women can be read as masquerade. The theory of masquerade essentially talks about the construction of an excessive femininity on the of the female to assert the male gaze. Tejaswini Niranjana, in her article, "The Vigilantism and the Pleasures of Masquerade," the female spectators of Vijay Shanti's films, inverts the psychological theory of masquerade to accommodate the other, and questions what happens when women dress up as men and behave like men, extending the idea of masquerade to an excessive disavowal of the feminine. She concludes that in terms of plot, the films do away with family romances and center the woman as the citizen figure directly involved in nation building. Originating in an unconventional family, these women do not show feminine emotions much. Tears immediately turn to rage and anger. They remain incorruptible, and nothing in the film sexualizes them, all of which we can see in Mardani as well. However, the problem with these vigilante films is the way they address their spectators, particularly the female. In the normal sense of masquerade, where an actress is attributed excessive femininity, the image presented on the screen creates a distance between the self, the spectating self, and the patriarchy-induced desire for the female to be a man. Niranjana states that the discomfort faced by female spectators of the woman but not really a woman vigilante films is due to the confusion of gender identity. Detaching masculinity and femininity from bodies, biologically male and female, these films that masquerade masculinity in female characters bluntly show the spectators the absence of those masculine attributes in them, detaching them from an on-screen persona and destabilizing the process of identification. The spectators, the women spectators of Mardani and Takni feel the same. The films ask them to be like these brave masculine women, but also questions if it is possible. Can we really be like them? Third kind of female cop film is where the policewoman is used as a trap to entice the criminal with the masquerade of excessive femininity. In Khalnayak, we have Madhu Dixit as a sub-inspector Ganga Gangotri Ganga Devi, who is depicted as the female police officers. The film depicts the female police officer's body acting as a structured assemblage of sex appeal as a woman and authority as a police officer. Ganga is presumably the jailer of the women's cell in the Nasik jails. She is short-tempered, bold, sharp-tongued, and does not hesitate to slap her women prisoners, keeping with the masculine ethos of the cop films. The twist in the film comes when Balram Prasad, Ballu, that's Sanjay Dutt, escapes the custody of the intelligence officer Ram Kumar Sinha, Jackie Shroff, that is Ganga's lover. To salvage Ram's reputation, Ganga spontaneously decides to catch Ballu, disguising herself as a Nautanki dancer, to seduce him into his capture. For her Stri Dharma, to protect the honor of Ram, she decides to commodify and sexualize her body. Unlike the policewoman films we discussed earlier, Khalnaik stresses on the femininity of Ganga as a policewoman. Firstly, her feminine sexual appeal was required to entice Ballu. And later, her sensitivity towards Ballu, feminine sensitivity towards Ballu, as she discovers in him a loving son and a misguided youth, is important for Ballu's transformation.
Hi, Nisha. Sorry to interrupt, but if you could wrap up in the next few minutes.
So her sensitivity, her feminine sensitivity, makes her understand Ballu's makes her understand the need of a mother figure for Ballu. Stuck between patriarchal notions of purity and womanhood, and the state's dictum of legality and morality, the final and most important contestation remains a question of Ganga's character. Nothing but a stain on Ganga's reputation results in Ballu's transformation, forcing him to surrender to the law. Only a man can certify a woman her purity. And in the end, the story becomes of a man rescuing a woman from social and legal punishment. As a policewoman, she is only a mechanism to reform a bad man. The narrative closure thus holds no emancipation for the woman, but draws her back into the conventional patriarchal order. In conclusion, we find that all the films, most of the cop films deal with sexual assault. These films can be categorized into three categories: avenging women cops, hypermasculine vigilante women cops, and sexual enticing bodies. All these categories of female cop films struggle with masculine anxiety about the relationship between women's sexuality and state, where a symbolically phallic woman holding the lathi struggles and questions the patriarchal structures of power and law. There are some questions that are beyond the scope of the paper. For example, how do we deal with women cops who are not to the embodiment of women's purity, like the corrupt police women of Pink and Chapak, etc. Moreover, there are some very nuanced portrayal of policewomen available on several web series, available on OTT platforms like Telecrime, She, Sony, Grehen, etc. So it will be interesting to see how the change in the medium changes the structure, plot structure, and character portrayal in the films and the web series. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nisha. So can we have all of the panelists on camera? We can go into the Q&A then. We saw how all of the three papers point to this particular type of Bollywood cinema coming up around victimization, sexual violence, and just the avenging of crimes by female characters. So I wanted to pose a question to all of you to see what you think. Do you think that we're seeing more diverse feminist narratives coming up in Bollywood cinema, or is this a start to that, or is it just a particular stereotyping of female victims and vigilantes in such films?
I can start. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of women-centric films. I mean, their films being marketized, publicized as that, but I think it's precisely because of that they need to be interrogated, because they sort of present I mean, this is the thing, I don't know that it's like a developmental, I think that's kind of what it would like, that the film industry would like to say, like, look, we now have more female-oriented films, this is what they're doing. But a lot of times when you, like, because I also found it interesting that we were all also looking at the 80s at the same time and sort of thinking, well, is it actually new, or is it just like the same wolf but in new clothes or something, and sort of thinking, but they're doing something different in the 2010s than they were doing in the 80s, or thinking about what that is. So obviously there are new forms of representation and they are doing wonderful things, some of them, but they also, that doesn't mean that they're not as complicit or raise as many questions. That would be my take.
Yeah, can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I feel that there are certain movies that have come up, like Angry Indian Goddesses, movies like recently like Paglet, and movies like Dolly, Kitty, or wo Suhane Sapne, I think something like that. I don't remember the title. So they are taking a different stand on women's identity, sexuality. So they and the trauma that they experience with regard to loss or with regard to violation. So, but a lot needs to be done. I mean, since my paper is specifically focused on courtroom genres, these two movies were the most recent movies which basically representative of that genre. So there are movies coming up like the ones that I named, but there still needs to be a lot more than that.
Nisha, what do you think?
I don't think I need to add anything more to what has already been said. Yeah, so of course there are some changes that are happening. It's the law of nature. Like, we can't keep doing the same thing. We need to go on. That's how evolution happens. So yeah, I think we are evolving. We have more nuanced portrayal of women, of victims, and because of new age writers, new age directors who are much more aware, I would say, of feminism and all these discourses around sexuality, rape, and victimhood. So I feel that we are making some progress, but is it all that we need? It's very, very new.
We have some questions in the Q&A box. First, the question is for Nisha. We see a different kind of police women portrayal in OTT films like the Fame Game. How are they different? What is your take on that?
Thank you, Lakshmi, for the question. I have not seen Fame Game, but then I recently saw She. She also has a policewoman. It's by Imtiaz Ali, available on Netflix. So there too, you have a policewoman who is also used initially as a sexual being, sexual enticing body, who was sent to entice this drug dealer, drug mafia, something. But then the film is nuanced because we see more into the development of the name of the main character. I'm so sorry, I forgot. Moving. Yeah, moving. Yeah. So we see her development. She, her sexual awareness. She gets to know her body, her desires. So it's more about that than simply police procedural film. So that way, of course, Delhi crime also, we do not have a very powerful police officer, but someone who is helpless because of the norms of the legal system and how things work, and then there's public outrage going on. So she's also trying to deal. There's some problem going on in her private sphere as well. So all of that is shown in. But then, of course, in a web series where you have so much time to deal with everything, it's easier for people to bring that out. But in a movie which is 3-hour thing, at max, we are also reducing that. So it becomes difficult, but of course, the gaze of the camera and the director also matters.
Thank you. There's another question for you. Since you suggest there is a more nuanced portrayal of female cops on the OTT platforms, what could be the possible reason behind it? Is it due to a shift from mass-based cinema to more class-based ones, or something else?
Yeah, so I think the time thing is an important, like the run time. How much time does a character get? is important. Other than that, of course, there is certain expectation of a character when they are on a big screen. They have to be shown larger than life because we see them larger than life, and all that has to happen because you are representative of a class of people. For example, the policewoman in Bardani, she's in some sense because she is the only police officer most of the time in the frame with so many other male colleagues. So she is in some sense a representative of the female police officer. She has to justify her position, justify that she deserves to be there. There is also in Mardani too, you have a whole thing where she has to go to an interview to justify why she deserves to be an officer. Because the interviewer simply asked her that it's because of you being a female that we have such a rise in crime. Ridiculous question, but then she has to answer that. So as a representative of the entire female fraternity, but that is somehow not required when you are looking at a film on your laptop or a web series on your mobile phone, because I feel there isn't a version of the way we look at things. While earlier we were looking up at the big screen, now most of the time we are either looking directly at or down at the mobile or the laptop screen, which enables us to look at the characters more like ourselves, who are struggling with the issues just like we would struggle with it if we were in their position. So all that enables these characters to be much more flesh and blood, much more nuanced. Time and our spectated position, I guess.
Thank you. I think the next question is for Amalie. What is your take on Mai on OTT in terms of the web series narratives? Mothers and police coming up with this instant justice, like the Disha case in Hyderabad, has a lot of public acceptance. What do we think of them?
Okay, so I will also come out and say immediately, I actually have not seen mine yet. It's on my watch list, and I definitely think, and sort of thinking about how Netflix has really been trying to get me to watch it for the longest time. And I think that kind of says something. It has seen that I have rewatched Mom a lot of times, which is on Netflix in at least in the US and in Europe. And so thinking about, you know, how algorithms and how we think of the OTT and how they produce films is this kind of they look at what is being shown already and sort of reproducing that. But obviously, I mean, I know the censorship regulations are changing, but previously had a lot of freedom, certainly with what they could do, and sort of also making these appeals that we can go that step further with some things that might not be able to shown on screen in the cinema and get a censorship, or at least it would be sort of. So I think these narratives, again, this is sort of going back, I think they are doing, like we could also look at Dolly and Kitty and Voce Chamakti, who is Italian, in the same way. Like they're doing new stuff. Made in Heaven is doing new stuff, but they are still, I mean, the fact they're still producing a lot, and it's still, I think, sort of like we can see how class, like it really sort of appealing both to a class maybe within India, but also sort of like this global audience, this where you have to have sort of like the rape revenge narrative is, it looks different in different places, but it's also hugely appealing. And I guess that's sort of like going to this like the notion of instant justice and the satisfaction of that. And I think, I mean, a lot of my project more generally explores sort of the relationship between law and cinema more broadly. And so I think there is something, I mean, this is kind of like, it's very satisfying. It gives a sense of, yes, justice has been done, but it never really explores all the structural violences and structural iniquities, who actually, you know, sometimes someone gets to do this instant justice, but it's not everybody. And so it creates a spectacle that we solved it, but it never really, it doesn't really get to that. And I think both the visual and the sort of the mediatization of the public acceptance when it does happen, but then the erasure when it doesn't happen, is really sort of thought-provoking. And I think it's kind of like, if cinema sort of is in that predicament that it's trying to deal with some of these things, but it's facing the same problems as feminist scholars have identified in other places as well, including law, sort of like the differential, like the description of like which cases get to be publicized, which cases get to have the swift justice, which don't. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to think about there, and how films maybe facilitate that, because I also think they kind of flatten, like there's some the way that I talk about Mom and Mardani and together, like Pyari and Arya are two very different subjects, and they get to, this is something I didn't get to talk about here, but they have very different subjects, but actually the films don't really, like, it's as if in Mardani, everybody is just being picked off the street, regardless of the subject position, but that's clearly not the case in real life. So it's kind of like, this is something that the film, they treat all the subjects as grievable in the same way, and that's not the case in real life. So I think the films are very complicit in that, but they present itself as doing some progressive job, which they are in some ways.
Thank you. Suman, I think there's a comment for you to look at taking the course of who is seen as a credible victim. If you can see the commonalities in real and real. And I think there's another question from Sabbir, who's asking, do you think that the police women also derive their power or privilege from their specific social location, mostly upper caste class? So anyone who wants to take a go at that.
So can I answer the question directed at me, the comment directed at me?
Yeah, sure.
So while I look at the case, not going into the details of the case though, it's you're right, when there can be a lot of commonalities between the real and the real, because both cases were cases of sexual harassment filed by an employee, filed against influential man from her workplace who holds a position of power. Both of them were, they had the same trajectory in that sense. Also, when I look at the case, how even in movie section 375, what happens is, the man, the accused man, who's the film director, he basically does confess to sexual misconduct on his part in having sex with his employee, who was at a subordinate position than him. Similarly, in Tarun Tejpal's case, he confesses to misconduct, but he does not agree to the charges of rape. Similarly, in the movie, the film director does not agree to the charges of rape. He says that this is a case of a scorned woman. Basically, she didn't get her way. So basically, at the end, she files a charge of rape. So this is a common theme that I see between the real and the real. Apart from that, some of the crucial evidences, as the case follows in Tarun Tejpal's case, a crucial evidence was the CCTV footage. Now, if you look at and personal chats, so which basically led to his acquittal in 2021. Similarly, within section 375, if you look at the movie, what happens is CCTV footage becomes a very crucial evidence in the judges and the lawyers subscribing to the fact that, basically agreeing to the fact that the director did not commit. So there are loopholes in the evidences in establishing whether there was an actual act of rape or it was consensual sex at the time. But since there was no presence of camera or any kind of recording within the private domain, the consent and the will of the victim could not be established. But they used, on the other hand, they used the footage within the hotel or within in the movie, the premises of the building, in order to establish the cruciality of how there was no changes in the victim's behavior after the sexual violence. So basically establishing that there is a doubt whether there was actually any sexual violence or it was consensual sex, and later it was construed by the victim as a sexual violation. So that is something that I see. But a major difference that I see in both the real and the real is how there is sort of a handing out of quick justice. due to public outrage within the case, within the reel. So due to media and public outrage, the director is convicted very quickly, no matter what the evidence really stands as within the courtroom. But in the real life, you can see that although it took how many years, the case was filed around 2013, 2014, but the judgment was finally handed out in 2021 last year, and he was acquitted of all his charges. So there is a major difference that despite this movie, in fact, Section 375 is actually as an outcome of the Me Too movement itself. In fact, you'll see in the imagery, the movie starts with, reporting of these Me Too allegations, newspaper clippings of reporting of Me Too allegations, and so on and so forth. So you can see that the movie is within this context of the Me Too movement. And so it kind of delivers a quick justice. But if you see in the real sense, there is no such thing as quick justice. Even after all these years have passed, in 2021, the accused stands acquitted of all his charges. So that's kind of a difference that I see in the script and the real life.
Thank you so much, Suman. I think there's another question over here for you. How do you look at the near absence of portrayal of female lawyers while fighting the case of women victims in majority of such courtroom dramas, and where the courtroom exchanges become the hostile playground of mostly male-only lawyers?
Yes. So like in the movie Chicken Curry, there is a complete absence of, so the judge is male. Both the lawyers, prosecution and the defense are male. While in Section 375, they have tried to attain a balance by showing the prosecution as a female lawyer, and there's a two-bench judge with one woman judge also. So you can see that within these two scripts, there's a massive differentiation between how sexual violence is perceived. And for example, the glaring difference, for example, there's a tiny bit of example wherein the female judge in Section 375, she says, when the victim is being questioned, she says, regarding the events of the sexual violence, she says that we will hold this trial in camera proceedings, and everybody who is unrelated to the case can leave the courtroom. So basically, you can see how the presence of a female judge, although one may say that this is the choice that the writer makes in the script by presenting such a incidents, but you can see the difference. But on the other hand, when you look at Chicken Curry, there is no such thing. There is no emphasis on the legal requirements when protecting the integrity or the modesty of the woman within these trials. So there she stands all alone without any kind of ally. There's no ally in terms of a lawyer, a female lawyer who understands her predicament, or a female judge who understands her predicament. But within the Section 375, where both of these allies are present for her, you kind of, throughout the script, you see that there are women allies who support her predicament, who understand her predicament, who understand her trauma, and through these little interventions kind of bring out to the audience the criticality of what emotional support or empathy towards a victim really means. Like I gave the example of allies such as the accused's wife who refused to participate in his innocence. So that is something that is missing in a masala thriller like Chicken Curry, where there is complete absence of such an ally to Maya. Or for example, the wife of the defense lawyer, who basically kind of, despite whatever the media says or whatever her husband says, she refuses to participate in the idea that her husband is defending a convict, no matter what the loopholes in the story might be. So the idea is to look at allies. So when I talk about female, when you have strong characters, female characters within the courtrooms, you kind of have certain allies for the victims. So it's about visible allies, how they make a collective possibility of a collective resistance very possible. Unlike scripts where men are dominant, or men are the ally, or men are the anti-heroes, or, there is sort of this missing collective alliance, so to say.
Thank you so much, Suman, Nisha, and Amalie, for the presentations and for answering all of our questions. This was a very interesting panel. And we have our next panel coming up at 3:30, which is called Masculinities on Screen. So I hope everyone will stay tuned and join in for the conversation in the next session. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone.